Thanks everyone for coming. My name is Fiona. I work at Faraway Mobile Services. Really glad to see you all here today for our HDG talk. As many of you know, Faraway Developer Group is a non-profit community for developers globally who share common interests and are passionate about new technologies. So through HDG, we're dedicated to supporting developers grow in their careers and passions through workshops and events and demos and technical support and funding. And we provide a platform for in-depth exchange and collaboration among developers. So today we're going to dive into the world of gaming and specifically how to kickstart your gaming app by getting an investor on board. So for many of you, maybe you think you have an idea for a gaming app, or you've already started, or you have a team together and you just don't know how to get to the next stage of how to find an investor, the kind of things to ask them, and how to really start that whole process. So today we have invited Amanda Schmidt as part of this support for gaming developers. So Amanda is Merger and Acquisitions Partnerships Manager at Trophy Games. She is very skilled in interaction and communication with people, and she combines these skills to help developers not only find investors, but also more specifically to help her passion with video games. So she'll be sharing her insights on how developers can attract investors for their gaming apps. She'll be exploring the fundamentals of what to do and what not to do, and then the different approaches of what you can ask for investors and how to negotiate with them. So without further ado, Amanda, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to pass over to you.
Yeah, of course. I hope everyone can hear me and everything is working as it should, or else please let me know. But thank you for having me and the Trophy Games on board for this. I'm very happy to share whatever tips and tricks I can share from this industry. We're basically here to help each other, I would say. And of course, there's a lot of steps with getting investors on board, and no pressure in this very nice presentation of me having nice communication skills and all of that. So I hope you'll get something either in terms of publishing or investor or something completely third out of this presentation. So yeah, let me just see if I can skip here. Yes, so a little bit about me. My name is Amanda, and yes, as Fiona said, I work as an M&A partnerships and strategic partnerships manager. I'm 27 years old, and I basically went from school to Trophy Games. So I don't have a lot of years in this industry, but I would say I have a lot of years with gaming in general, just in pastime and free time. And so I have a bachelor's degree in social education, which is called a little bit different from country to country. Some would call it after school teachers. Some is kindergarten teachers, I guess you would call it. So very out there, practical. Then I built a master's degree on top with philosophy of education, which basically is philosophy around humans, which tells a lot about me because I love interacting with people. I love, that sounds creepy, but love observing human interactions and just learning more about us as people. Yeah, then I wrote a little bit about my favorite games because that shows a lot, I feel like, about a person, what they're playing themselves. And there I have Dragon Age, Final Fantasy, and Kingdom Hearts. Right now I'm playing way too much Stardew Valley, and we here in Denmark have a bank holiday tomorrow, so I'll probably play way more Stardew Valley back tomorrow. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, but that's not really why we're here. We're here to talk about, like, how do you get an investor on board when you have an idea, and a little bit when should you seek out an investor, where should you seek out an investor, and how do you do it. So here we have a little bit about where. So the platforms, and that's can differ a lot. Like now we have a little bit of a focus on the European, but in Trophy Games, we look very globally. Of course, there are areas that is harder and easier to get into in the gaming industry. But I would say definitely as like the top one a LinkedIn page, no matter if you're a solo developer, having just started your company, maybe not even started a company yet, have a LinkedIn page that really shows and tells just a little bit about you and your game, and that can refer to, again, as I wrote, like Twitter or any other social media that you're using to share things about your game. Like, and that's also why I wrote Twitter on, because a lot of people are sharing on Twitter. I use Twitter a lot for research in terms of new games, in terms of like what's really hyping on Kickstarter, and like, again, referring to other platforms. Like, you can really dig down in a rabbit hole, both on LinkedIn and on Twitter, which I see, as an investor at least, a lot of benefits in, but that's also how I find people. So those two platforms I would definitely recommend. Of course, you know your audience best. So if Instagram is the best way for you, if TikTok is, like, I know cozy games is a big thing on TikTok. I see that a lot, and I kind of use that a lot, but that's more private and not so much professionally. But I get a lot of games there as well. When we're talking events, I've kind of written the big ones, and I would still say prioritize, because GDC is in San Francisco, and if we're like thinking that we're European based, it can suddenly have a big budget of traveling to the United States. And also the tickets are usually quite a heavy price when you're going to a venue. So I would say prioritize, research a lot, like, is this the event for me and my game? Like, I know there's a European showcase over at San Francisco. So if you feel like you really fit in there, perhaps that would be an option for you. Again, you can join online, which I would definitely recommend if you're like thinking, perhaps doubting a little bit, what will I get out of this event? Because then you save the travel expenses, and the passes are usually quite more cheaper when you're doing it via either, like, it's not Meet to Match anymore, but their own platform. Gamescom, I would definitely recommend. Again, a little bit of a prioritizing whether or not, because that's a big event, and a lot of solo and indie developers can drown a little bit when you have those really big players that come there. So again, if you have researched and feel like it's the right thing for you, or perhaps just for experiencing that kind of event, I would definitely say that's probably the one on this list I would recommend the most of the physical events. Nordic Game as well. That was actually last week. So that's quite fresh in my memory, where I would say where Gamescom is a lot of like hyping the big companies as well. Nordic Game is very focused on, of course, the Scandinavian countries. Also, of course, people are traveling from all over Europe, but it's also very meeting heavy focus, where Gamescom is more of a show, where Nordic Game is very much focused on either expanding your network, connecting with new people, or connecting with people you already talked to. Like, it's the first time Nordic Game has been physical for 3 years, so perhaps you've connected with people beforehand. Again, if that's what you're focusing on, really, I talked with people that were sitting back to back for meetings all 3 days. And if that's something you're up for, I would definitely recommend Nordic Game as well. I would do some research as well. This is the big ones I would say we have here in Europe. There's also some that are more focused on perhaps Unity development. Probably also if people are looking into do more like blockchain stuff, or if you're more focused on doing freelance research, what is in the area. There's quite a lot of game conference calendars you can find on the internet. I would probably just Google game conference calendar, and I have one I always use that really shows everything. It also shows the Steam Next Fest. It shows like virtual. It weirdly enough didn't show Nordic Game last week, but that's a bit of a miss, I think. So yeah, do research, do online as well. I feel like you get some out of the online events, but it's really up to, oh, I see I wrote the game conference guide. That's the one I was referring to. But try different stuff and try to see how it works for you. So yeah, a little bit about us here at Trophy Games. We are game developers ourselves, which is not, I wouldn't say it's that unusual anymore for investors to be. We have a few here in Denmark doing the same thing. We've been game developers since 2006. We're located in Copenhagen in Denmark. And last year we announced our IPO and went public on Nasdaq First North Denmark. And yeah, we usually refer to ourselves as trophy nerds. We actually kind of heavy emphasize that we want people to enjoy playing games, especially if it's focused around gaming. Of course, we have some more office management focused roles in our teams as well. But just so it kind of connects people in a very nice way. So yeah, and a little bit more details about us. We're around 50 people. We have developed our own around 7 games, I would say. We have some that are inactive right now. They're mobile games. We started off with browser games, doing football management, went on to do football management on mobile. Then we expanded a little bit, doing an esport management title. And then we just released our Warhammer Soul Arena title, which is most of the icons that you will see in this slide because they're the nicest looking that we have. Then we have 2 acquisitions last year. So that's more into the investor heavy areas. We acquired Sambat Development, which is a solo developer doing airline management titles, which fit very well into our portfolio already, and we could help a lot there. Then we acquired the Tiny Titans IPs. That is a bit more casual market. So that was very much to open our own doors into another market completely on mobile and also a little bit on PC. And that was an IP acquisition, meaning we didn't acquire the company. We only acquired their mobile portfolio because the company wanted to move over to PC and didn't want to have to keep updating their mobile games. They kind of wanted to cut those off. So that fit also quite nicely with our plans. Then I just briefly want to talk a little bit about the different types of investments that you can seek. And there's a lot, and there's probably a lot that I've missed here, but this is the ones I mostly occurring when people are writing me or when I'm writing to people. There are the seed rounds where you're like seeking smaller equity investments. So that's also surrounded about like giving parts of your company during the seed rounds. It can be, usually people get advisors on board how to do those. There are A and B rounds, and that's a little bit differently. I won't talk too much about that because that's not really our area, which I will bring into later. Then there's the project funding, where it's really funding the project. That can also be like publishing, which is further down my list here. And there's a lot of ways people are seeking project funding. So there can also be crowdfunding, Kickstarter. Some have local. I think France have a local like crowdfunding platform. And then a lot of countries have government funding. We have one here in Denmark, which is very focused on doing like the cultural and artsy games, which is also a little bit why we are expanding as investors, because we want to support games that are not necessarily very artsy, but some that have more commercial value. But that's very local to Denmark. That's how it's working currently. I know Sweden, Germany, Finland, I think, have a little bit more options than we have here. So that's a bit of early stage. That's when you're planning your first title, not having a big portfolio behind you when you're just starting out, because you can say you're not giving too much up with these options. We have the late stage then, which is very much my area, where we have the M&A discussions, we have the equities, which is also in the seed rounds, but in regards to what we're looking for bigger parts than are usually relevant into the seed rounds. And then, of course, the acquisitions, which is us buying a full company. We're not interested in buying, usually we're not interested in buying companies without the people, unless it makes very, very well sense to us and our plans, like the Tiny Titan. We're very much interested in the people. And I wrote, not depending on timing with publishing. I still mean that, but of course you have to think about when you're seeking publishing, which we will get into. So yeah, how does it work and what to expect after an investment? And of course that can mean 100 things. There are, of course, differences between what you've negotiated with the partners. There's like, of course, there's a difference between having equities and full-on acquisition in terms of still the freedom to do stuff, but that's again very, I would really focus on negotiating and make sure that you and your potential partners are very much on the same wavelength. Then there's also the publishing and project funding, which is not usual. That's not a part of the company. It's more like this project. Some people are collaborating with their publishers for a lot of titles. And then sometimes it moves over to being an investment. But whereas you keep, I would say, a little bit more of independence, where you, at some point, the deal will close sooner than with a M&A deal. Depending on location, I mean, what do you expect if, let's say, we invest in a company outside of Denmark, if we still keep it in Europe, there's still the question about do people have to travel? Like, we do not expect people to travel back and forth from their own country into Denmark, especially with the tools that we have now. But that's also something that's important to keep in mind. Where are the partners located? Usually, I don't think it's a problem at all where the location is based. Of course, but the partners and the publishers should be aware of course, this difference in rules and the difference in finances between the borders. But that's really just to make sure that you're aware. And of course and as I will bring on later, the need from the developers. What do the developers need from a publisher? Is it, of course, you have to go with your gut feeling if you want someone close to you, so you easily can travel back and forth, or if it's okay with you to have it on digital platforms. How does communication work? Again, just really go with, does this feel right? Which is easier said than done, I knew. Publishing versus investments. And I made this slide before we announced the publishing deal that we announced a few weeks back, where we are publishing a PC game called The Rangers. We are usually looking just to do M&A deals and do like acquisitions, but sometimes, as I wrote, when is publishing the smart move? Sometimes developers prefer the publishing deal because, as we talked about earlier, there is more independence and the collaboration can stop sooner with just the one title. So sometimes developers see it as a smart move with publishing. We're a little bit biased. We usually want to start off with trying to discuss investments, but we're also open to do the publishing because even through an investment, we want to do kind of the same thing. We just prefer people to self-publish, but that's very subjective to how we do at Trophy Games. So yeah, that's also because we want to be on board for a long time. We want to be a part of the company and the company to be part of us, and yeah, to consolidate in that way. A little bit about us as developers. As I said, we done football management titles, moved into the auto chess genre. This is a little bit relevant because this is where we can help a little bit. For example, some people ask me, oh, can you do publishing on console? And I would say, hopefully at some point we can, but not right now. So it's very important for us to emphasize where our strengths are, and that is in strategy-focused games. It can be the spreadsheets, as in football management and airline management, or it can be more the visual strategies in our auto chess game, and the mid to hardcore gameplay, because a lot of, when you think mobile, a lot of people are thinking the very hyper casual games where we really don't know a lot about those games either. So yeah, mobile first, and also moving into the PC market, and definitely more this year. So us as investors, I've talked pretty much already about what we do. We want to be active. We want to pretty much do the same as a publisher would do, but we want to reinvest the money into the company instead of just as a publisher during the recoupment period, takes a part of the money and then spread it out onto other projects that may not have anything to do with the company where the recoupment is going on. Where we see as an investment, people can self-publish, and then we can reinvest those the money into the company for years and years to come to also make new projects. That's why we're M&A focused. And a quite big deal for us is that we want to be majority investors. That means we want 50%, which is also why the seed rounds doesn't really make sense for us. I usually say it's not a no-go, but since we want pretty much half or the whole company when we do the M&A talks, or when it comes to publishing, of course, it's not about that. But then it doesn't make sense for us usually to be in a very early stage. Of course, sometimes it does if people have a great idea. As I said, we are gamers and nerds ourselves. I would say we can recognize a great idea when we see it. Then we come with a specific skill set as well. Like funding is a little bit implicit when you're talking investment. So we also want to emphasize that we do more. We have the experience. We have a very diverse and specialized team. We have quite a big marketing team that has a lot of experience with doing UA and paid advertisement. And then we have a lot of contacts on different platforms, Apple, Google. So it's a little bit easier to get connected to those platforms when you know how to contact them and not just using the support channels. So that's a little bit with what we can help with. And I wrote a whole lot of quality assurance because we're a team that loves to play games. Here I also wrote, never be afraid to ask investors questions as well. And that is in regarding to when you're sitting in a meeting. Always ask like what the investor is seeking, and never be afraid to like ask questions, which I will get more into a little bit here. So what to prepare before a meeting? I would say some of them is little bit self-explanatory. Have a pitch ready. Usually, I would say that's a big benefit if you have something to show. It doesn't have to be a 12-minute gameplay video and have like, as I wrote, like how long should your pitch be? Sometimes people talk about elevator pitches. I want personally a little bit longer than that, but I also receive pitches that have been 100 slides, which kind of kills the energy a little bit. Usually it sounds a little bit hard to say as well, but investors want a broad explanation of both the game and the company, but we're not interested in every asset in your game. We have the confidence is that you know everything about the game, and we don't necessarily in the pitch need to know everything about your game. We need to know, of course, the genre. I usually ask about competition as well, but we'll get into and we go into during meetings. What should be included in the pitch? Company information. I prefer to have a cap table as well, just to see who has the shareholding in the company, of course, when we are going into talking M&A deals. Just the size of the company, the age of the company. Of course, it's very nice with like the experience from people. It's not necessary for me, but some investors might want to know if someone have 20 years in the industry. And the prototype I know is always like the hard one because it's kind of correlating to how early should you start seeking investments. I would say the prototype, I usually ask for it. If people do not have a prototype, I usually say, let's keep connecting. Let's meet up when we can. When you have updates, please send them to me. But we're not ready to go into a publishing or investment deal if we don't have something tangible as a prototype, or gameplay video can also sometimes be enough if we can see that it's not just pre-rendered scenes in a trailer. What to expect in meeting, and I could imagine, also I get that myself sometimes, you can get nervous before a meeting and nervous that you don't have enough or you don't have enough information, or of course it depends who you're pitching to. So I would just say I usually focus a lot on it being an equal conversation. It's not someone being above someone else. I expect myself to do as much research for the company I'm having a meeting with. But I also do expect in return people to know a little bit about trophy games going into a meeting. I'm not, of course, I will tell people if they have no idea who we are, and it also depends, did I contact them or did they contact me? If I contacted them, I have less expectations, so to say, because the one initiating the meeting should definitely know the other part. So I would say do a little bit of research on the people that you're going to talk to, but also expect the same from my part, that I should know why we're in this meeting at all. Again, so what would I like to know in a meeting? Like, what questions should you expect? A little bit of the story behind the team, like, why did you make this game that you're pitching me? Or who is the company, if it's more company oriented than game oriented? The size of the team, who does what in the company, what is lacking is also something I would like to know. Because then I have an idea about where we can help as investors. Yeah, is there like who's in the company and what is outsourced is also very nice to know, because sometimes people are also writing like the freelancers into the team, which is, I completely understand. I just like to know who is like the core team and who is helping this game reach release. Also have a great idea about what you're looking for. Are you looking for publishing, project funding, M&A, equity, seed rounds? Like, what kind of investment are you going into for this meeting? If we're going with the seed rounds or the equity investments, I will ask for evaluation. I don't always expect people to have evaluation because a lot of people want that to be externally handled with a partner and an advisor, which of course costs some out of the budget that could go into development of the game. But I will ask it, and I won't get offended if people don't know what their valuation is, especially if it's the first an upcoming game where perhaps you're not earning any revenue yet. So that makes complete sense. But if that's the kind of investment you're seeking, I would expect that question. In trophy games, we're quite KPI oriented, meaning key performance indicators, where we are quite focused on numbers. We, again, if it can be team sizes, it can be like, where does the funding come from? Also, I will usually ask for like a burn rate, like how much does the company spend each month? Are you bootstrapped? A lot of, like, I would say, the boring numbers questions. Again, it's a lot of numbers to remember. I won't expect people to know every single number. Then I would probably, if I was the one pitching, say that they can send, usually you have your contact, shared contact information between each other. So I would say, let me send that to you afterwards. Let me check up on that. So just like to keep the conversation going. But that's definitely, again, I can mostly speak from our part, but that's questions that we will ask, very number oriented. And yeah, don't be afraid if you can't answer it. And also it depends on the case. Of course, we know if we're talking to a company that have 10 games in their portfolio or are working on their first one, we, again, expect me to have done some research. And yeah, so that's definitely. Then after a meeting, I kind of shared this between the best case scenario and worst case scenario. So how do you, in terms of best case scenario, handle it in trophy games? I would say, let's say we have a meeting on a meet to match event where you have half an hour to talk to each other. Half an hour is really not that much, both if you're pitching and if you want any information out of the investor. It's like in a blink of an eye. So I always say, please send me the pitch so I can read it myself as well and share it with my team. We have a mergers, we call it, team here in Trophy Games. So we share the different information between like our parties there. So anything tangible. Then we will, if like the rest of the team agrees that this is awesome, we want a follow-up meeting where usually the rest of the team or some from the team will join. And just to, again, like hear a little bit more. It's a little bit, sometimes it can seem repeating to the first meeting, but that's just to make sure that everyone is like also feeling the chemistry a little bit, like can people understand each other in terms of what's the plans, what's the goals, what's the vision for this project or the company. If everything goes right there will be some negotiations, and that can be a different process depending on if we're doing publishing or equity. Publishing, I would say, can take a couple of months to be sure that you're on the same wavelength and you understand each other. Acquisitions and equities, I have experience with taking a little bit longer, but then there's the whole LOIs, letter of intent, and due diligence. Both if we're talking publishing but mostly if we're talking equities. worst case scenario would be that there's no immediate match. That would probably, that's when we had like the meet to match meeting, and you send me the pitch, I've talked it over with our team, and then we decided this is not the right time for it right now. So what happens if there's no immediate match right now? And you will probably expect that from every publisher. I will never like close down a conversation and say no, because that's really bad if suddenly, for us at least, if suddenly you have created the next Stardew Valley and we said no, we will never work with you. That would be the worst thing to do ever. I'm always interested in catching up with people, always keeping up to date with what people and what the company is doing, especially if there's no immediate match. So how to act on that. That's where I have how to stay connected. Sometimes people can think that we try to be as quick as possible, but sometimes we have a lot of cases at once. As example, with Nordic Game, you have a lot of meetings and a lot of things get a little bit convoluted in my inbox. So feel free always to reach out and nudge and tell me I'm being too slow, or that's my experience. Of course, I can't speak for all investors and all publishers. I would say please feel free to reach out to them. And if people are like answering that a little bit like, I wouldn't say offended, but perhaps cold, I would think a little bit extra if it's the right partner, because there will have to be a lot of contacts later on in the collaboration. So I would say always feel free to reach out. And that's also with updates. I have a great example for people sending both a newsletter to me every month, but also a new and updated demo every month, which I know takes a lot, but they've been doing it for, I think, a year since we had our last meeting, where it wasn't an immediate match. But like now I keep remembering them because they keep popping up sometimes in my inbox. Of course, I don't have time to try the prototype every month, but it keeps the company in my memory. But again, it can take a long time. How to act in regards to a follow-up email. Yeah, that is, sometimes I reach out to companies as well, like say, how are you doing? How's everything holding up? There people are sometimes, it's very different how people are reacting. Sometimes people have found partners and that's awesome. Sometimes I will ask for like, should we just have 30 minutes again to catch up? How does that fit you? Sometimes, of course, it's okay if you're very busy, and we'll say like, okay, let's touch base again in a few months. I would say always try to be as open as possible when people are reaching out. Again, it's kind of you never know when you're going to meet them, a little bit to think selfishly. But yeah, sometimes I do quite often reach out to people again, even though there was not an immediate match right away. So that was mainly about how we at Trophy Games personally tackle the investment part before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. So here I will just really briefly give you the channels that I use for also keeping up to date, but also being a bit prepared for meetings. I use the indie game business platform a lot. I listen to their podcast on Spotify and use their Discord server, where they both have like business news and they have events sometimes on the Meet to Match platform. And usually it's publishers telling developers how to pitch or something like that. And I find it very useful because then I can also hear what other publishers are thinking. They usually have a lot of different people on board. They have a lot of podcast episodes about this. So from a like the other side of the table is very useful as well, but it's definitely useful for developers to hear different sides of the industry. Then I use the Elite Game Developers, which is both a blog and a podcast, which is kind of the same with indie game business. He talks a lot with developers and how they is usually focused on the equity and acquisitions part. We talk with quite big developers and how they made the decision perhaps to go into the mergers and acquisitions and what made them do it and what they were aware of and how they handled it. A personal favorite of mine is Women in Games. I use that platform a lot for networking, basically. Of course, that is mostly relevant to women, probably. Men are also welcome to the events. But it gives like a nice like feeling of the industry in other areas than the previous mentioned platforms does. They do a lot of careers networking events, and they're very active on social medias, and they have a lot of ambassadors around the world. So that, and they're quite easy to get in contact with if you have any questions or if you're curious about something, I find at least. So definitely recommend all of these three a lot. So almost at the end now. This is actually just a little bit about where to find us, a little bit shameless plug for Trophy Games. So yeah, I have my email here. Feel free to write me if you have any questions or if you just want to sell something or show something. Feel free to reach out there. I have my LinkedIn page as well here, and then we have the Trophy Games website I've linked, and also our LinkedIn page there. It's also sometimes I'm not the right person to contact. Sometimes people are asking in terms of freelancing for marketing, and then our Trophy Games LinkedIn page will show way better who might be relevant to contact in terms of marketing or in terms of development or just in terms of hiring, where that's not my area. My area is if people want to pitch something and they need some funding. Yeah, and then we have questions.
That's great, Amanda. Thank you so much for the presentation. So yeah, we're opening up to questions now. Feel free to write your questions in the chat box, or you can come off mute and ask a few questions. I'm going to kick off though with the question I have. So when it gets to the negotiation stage of say that you have been given an offer, is it good to accept the first offer? Are you expected to negotiate? Is there a rule that you should never accept your first offer? How would you go about that, and what advice would you give?
Yeah, of course. I would say always expect the investor to negotiate. So I would also say you should also like kind of put the business hat on and at least try to play a businessman. I know sometimes it's hard when you're usually like a lot of us are also very introverted, have a bit of like perhaps it's easier to say yes than no. Also, of course, you should feel like, can I negotiate here? It's kind of like almost an art form. But expect the investor to negotiate, and we kind of also expect people to negotiate back. It's not like, no, then we're just closed off, then we don't want to. That's from our side, definitely. But that's what we expect.
Okay, that's great to know. So everybody, if you've got an offer, if you've come to the point where you've got an offer, definitely do go for the negotiation. Another question, Amanda. Do you suggest to all of our budding developers here that they should shop around for investors? Do you find one and then you go with them, or should you try different investors to see the different types of deals that you can get?
Yeah, of course. I would say it's a little bit of a fine balance. As I said, I expect people, if they're reaching out to me at least to do some research about knowing who we are, I would definitely say shop around, but not so much that you're getting in over your head. So you suddenly perhaps lose the overview of who am I having a meeting with today? Oh no, I don't know this person actually. So you are feeling secure still, but definitely it's smart. Also a little bit to the previous question to put the business mind on a little bit and be strategic about it. And of course you can always like say, oh, this company gave me this offer. It has to be true, of course, but then you can kind of a little bit like if you're buying, I don't know, a TV or something like that.
Okay, great. Everyone, feel free to share your questions. Okay, we've got one. We've got one here from Jan. So, what do you think is the best conference or event to find investors in Europe? So we know that you gave a list earlier, but is there one that you think that we should send everybody to?
Then I would probably say Gamescom. If we're focusing on Europe, that is where all the big players are going, and people from all around the world. You will also expect to see a lot of Americans and Australian and from all over the place. Everybody is collected there a little bit. I don't actually remember the price of the venues there because they haven't accessed them yet for this year. But of course, if you feel like you have the budget for it, definitely that one.
Okay. And one more question from my side unless anybody else has a question, we can wrap it up soon. But when you go to an investor, obviously there's a negotiation of the deal, but what else should you be looking for from an investor? So obviously there's the money, but is there anything else that people should try and negotiate to sweeten the deal?
Yeah, I would definitely ask perhaps in the first meeting as well, like as I talked about, ask the investor question, because the money and the funding is a little bit implicit. Some people are also asking me like, can you afford this? Where I'm like, that's perhaps not the best question to ask an investor. But I would ask more about, instead of asking about the money, ask about like, where does this investor come from? As I usually say, we're very not the suit and tie investors. We're more a little bit casual approach investors in terms of like how we introduce ourselves and where we are coming from as developers ourselves. And when you see us as developers, I would also, of course, expect that we know how to develop the games, but definitely ask about the know-hows and perhaps like, do you need help with platforms, porting, localization, QA, marketing? Like, ask the investor what's their experience in those specific areas where you might need help, except for fund or besides from funding.
So each investor has like their own expertise. Maybe they're better at user acquisition, or the platform's very strong. So it depends on what you want as well. You find the investor based on your needs.
Yeah, I would have, and of course, if you kind of need help, some people need help with everything. Perhaps if you're like a solo developer and like you know how to develop the game, that's also fine. Like, of course, then I know we can like help from our connections outside of trophy games. Like I usually say, if people are looking to do like Kickstarter, we have contacts with like Ghost Ship Games, with Deep Rock Galactic here in Denmark, where we can pull on that. So also like the network is very important to ask about that. I don't really feel like there's a lot in that area, like wrong questions that you can ask.
Okay. And then last thing, is investments key? Is it important? Do you really need an investor to kickstart your game?
Well, I would say that's probably a bit of a gray area. Of course, we believe in people doing it themselves. We see a lot of cases where people are doing it themselves. but we also see a market right now that is consolidating quite quickly. We see Microsoft buying Blizzard. We see Embracer buying, like, I don't know how many companies a year. We see a very different gaming industry than we saw like 10 years ago. So we see a bit of a need to like help smaller developers as investors because it gets harder being a smaller developer, but of course it's still possible.
Okay, cool. We have some great questions here actually coming up. So one more question, what should be the level of completeness of the prototype to be demonstrated? So how complete does your prototype need to be before you approach an investor?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I know it's a little bit of like handing over, not necessarily your baby perhaps, but like people tend to be very perfectionistic when it comes to just making the vertical slice and the prototype. People also tend to make a lot of disclaimers where it's like, remember, it's pre-alpha, and we know that, but also it's still the impression that you're giving the game. So something that you're comfortable with sharing, but not, of course, you want to get funding if you need it very quickly. So you shouldn't wait until you're completely satisfied. Like we can see behind, if you don't like your UI, or if like there is a lot of like motion blur, or the frames per second is not 60 frames per second. Of course, we can see behind all of that, but we need to get a feel of the game. So it's again a very fine balance.
Okay, and then I mean the prototype kind of, it goes on to IP management. What do you suggest about IP management when you take your work to an investor? How do you manage this? And also, I guess when you do get an investor on board, how do you manage your IP? Does it belong to them? Does it belong to you? Should you keep hold on it?
That's a bit of a subjective opinion for me coming right now, so take it with a grain of salt. I would say don't turn over your IP. I know a lot of publishers that kind of have that clause with, if you don't reach your goal, they can take your IP, which I think sucks. So I would say keep your IP very close to heart and be careful how you're handling it. I would say it should be yours. Of course, it depends if you're doing acquisitions. If it's an acquisition, you're consolidating with the investor, and of course, it gets like shared, you can say, between, but then you turn it over to the investor because you become part of that. But if we're talking publishing, I would say be very careful with just handling over your IP.
Okay. Amanda, thank you so much for coming on and for chatting to us and taking us through your trophy games and your thoughts on reaching and raising capital for your gaming app. Today is just one of the webinars that we do to support developers. We have plenty of programs going on through the year to support developers and students and gaming developers, not just with our webinars and our technical support, but also with funding. We do have a very exciting Apps Up competition coming up with a $200,000 prize pool for Europe. So that's coming up. If you are interested to register interest or even get on board, if you have an app, or if you're thinking of creating an app over the summer, this year we are running this contest. We start at the end of next month and we end in October. Follow us on Huawei Developers for more information, and you'll be the first to hear about the new competition. So if you've got an app, submit it, and maybe you'll get a chance of winning one of our prizes. We've got prizes for women developers and student developers and best apps. So keep your eyes peeled and look out for Apps Up coming up. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you, Amanda, so much for coming and for Trophy Games. And to all of you, I hope this is really informative. We'll be sending up a follow-up email with a summary of what Amanda's gone through and some of the question and answers as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.